Some photographers use the camera to chase moments. Others use it to wait, to listen, to receive. Jonas Paurell is firmly in the latter camp. Originally from Sweden, Jonas creates work that feels quiet but expansive. Images shaped by memory, place, and emotional presence. Whether he's photographing the shifting light of a coastal landscape or the stillness of a face, his photographs invite us into a space where the external world and the inner world meet. There's a deep sensitivity to his work, a sense that he's not just documenting what's in front of him, but responding to it, often with reverence, sometimes with sorrow, always with care. His portfolios reflect a poetic engagement with time, light, and the deep human desire to connect. This is Ibarian X, and this is The Candid Frame. Yeah, thanks for making time for me, and thanks for reaching out. I appreciate it.
And thanks for having me. And may I say now that we're actually face-to-face, terribly sorry for your loss of your home. That must be a tragedy that I can't even imagine, eh?
Oh, I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Yeah. No, I've been a listener for a long time, and I'm excited to be on and to be able to talk to you and to be able to share a story that is very, close to my heart. So excited to do this.
Well, I'm been looking forward to the conversation, and especially being able to share it with my audience. So, well, your images are wonderful, and the story behind them just as much. One of the things that really struck me was the relationship you have with a particular part of the world, which is the Arctic, where a lot of your work revolves from. And in reading about you, you talk about your first experience when you were 18 or 19 years old, traveling to the Arctic. A lot of people travel to an outdoor destination and something just clicks, right? And it's a very transformative moment, as it was for you.
It really was, yes.
Yeah. Tell me more about what that feeling was like, especially, who you were as a teenager at that point in your life. Why do you think it was so significant?
It's I'm 43 going 44 now. It feels like it's hard to remember those days, but yet it's also like yesterday. I grew up in Gothenburg, the second largest city in Sweden. And as a young boy, I was always out in the woods, out in the forests around where I grew up. And, always getting into trouble, always climbing a new tree or falling off another tree or whatever it was. And I had this connection to nature when I was a child. But as you move into your teenage years, well, in my case, I lost something, but I didn't know that I had lost something, and I was in high school. I did what everyone else did in high school. I lived a life of, trying to fit in, to party, to spread the wings and do all that. And then all of a sudden I find myself 19 on a whim. I'm up in the Swedish mountain north of the Arctic Circle. And I just find myself in a landscape that I hadn't really ever imagined even, I think. And I was just struck by the grandeur, by the intensity of it. Like I remember we trekked about 20K or so the first day into this landscape. And I was sitting on a rock next to the tent. It was me and my friend who did this trip together. And I just sat on this rock and I stared into this landscape. And there was like these most intense greens I've ever seen. And the mountain was this incredible dark, almost black. And all of this was just towering above me. It was an experience that just hit me straight into the heart and into the soul. And I was like, oh my God, I did not expect this landscape to even exist. And for me, it was the kind of thing that it created a real addiction over the years, I would say.
It's lovely to hear that, because oftentimes when people talk about, destinations, whether it's the Arctic or a national park or something like that, they talk about places being very picturesque, but they don't often talk about what it feels like to be in the midst of that and having an emotional connection to the place. And And especially now in the age of Instagram and, and selfies, that's often lost for the sake, the pursuit is just the image, not necessarily the experience. But I think it's really interesting that at 18 or 19 years old, that you were in tune to that. Because as you say, when you're 18 or 19 years old, maybe just speaking for myself, there's a lot of navel gazing, And even
but of course, same for me, eh?
Yeah.
Definitely the same for me, but it's you sometimes when things click, you can't even explain why. It just works. The stuff just makes sense, and that landscape it just did that to me. It's one of the strongest memories I have, that first meeting with the Arctic landscapes. But it was also the big adventure. My friend and I, his name was Anders, we were going trekking for a week, and being out in that space was perhaps the greatest adventure I've ever done at that age. And as such, we carried too much stuff. We were foolish. We did so many things wrong. But, all is well that ends well, and you learn something from it. And for me at that age, photography was already important, but I wasn't there for the photos or for the picturesque of it. This all came later in life. I was a photographer from the age of 13, and I obviously brought a camera up there, and I took loads and loads of photos that are somewhere in a storage box in Sweden. And I haven't seen them in years, but the purpose of being there was not photography. That the intensity by which I pursue photography now did not come for at least 5-10 years later after that first experience up in the Arctic.
And how soon after that first trip did you return?
I'd say probably the next year, actually. So that region of the Arctic, so I grew up in Sweden, which is a really, really long country, a really tall country. I grew up in the southern part of that. And traveling by train from where I lived to the train station up in Kiruna or one of the ones around there where you could access the Scandis mountain, these Arctic mountains that we have in Sweden, we're looking at 26 hours by train. So it's a massive journey and not something that as a young kid or a young man that I could do very easily. So I think in the beginning there it was once per year. And of course, as I grew older and started focusing on that, it changed. It became much more of something that I did with the intention of creating stuff,
How do you feel that it changed your perspective when you got back to your normal life? And you were trying to, build a life as a young man. I mean, you talk about it being so transformative, but
I think these were the kind of journeys that I was able to carry with me when I was back home. I was proud of my achievement of being able to trek through these harsh mountains and survive in that harsh landscape, even though in reality now in a retrospect, perhaps it wasn't so harsh. It was quite easy compared to things I've done since then. But as that 19-year-old, big-eyed boy that ended up there, for me, this was a completely different world out of my comfort zone in every way. And when you come home having been to the extreme, whatever that is, I think to each their own, how they define what is extreme to them. To some people, it can be extreme just to go for a 4-hour walk. For me, it was extreme to go for a week-long hike in the Swedish mountains and to live off only what I had in my backpack, to drink water from streams and to feel like I was truly, truly alive, And that is something that I think changes a person when you get home. It makes you walk a little straighter, gives you self-confidence, I guess. It gives, actually that's probably the answer that really was eluding me trying to answer your question. It gave me a lot of self-confidence. It gave me a better self-image, perhaps more self-worth. I had done something I perhaps didn't think I was able to do. And through that, it transformed me into marginally the next level of myself.
Yeah. For me, when I've experienced landscapes like that, one, it's very humbling, but it has an amazing way of tamping down the noise that, when I get back into my world is waiting there for me. But when I'm out there, it seems like everything becomes incredibly quiet, at least in my head. And it provides an opportunity to breathe fresh air, not only literally, but figuratively.
I call it, in my head at least, the decompression. Sorry, I need to cough. I call that the decompression when I think about that. I have this theory. When you go to nature, doesn't matter if it's your backyard or a faraway expedition. When you go to spend a significant amount of time in nature, the first 3 days are a write-off. You need to decompress the thoughts of your everyday life. You need to let go of your grounding in reality. Those first 3 days, you're focused on the emails that you didn't answer. The emails that you did answer, but perhaps you regret some of the words that you put in the emails or how you formulated, or if you were not humble enough or whatever it might have been, right? And then after those 3 days, you go into this total Zen mode, but perhaps what you call the quiet. And that's where the value lies of being in the wild, in wilderness, in nature, that quiet zone where the song of a bird, the buzzing of a bumblebee, everything is so loud and so directed at your ears, and you can actually hear these things, whereas if you just walk through a park in your city, you probably wouldn't even notice half of these things. But there, in the quiet, in the space where you are one with the world. I see this kind of longer treks as my own mindfulness practice, because you are living the moment, and it's only the moment that exists. You're hungry, you eat. You're tired, you sleep. You're thirsty, you drink water. Your existence is taken down to these fundamental base needs, and with that, your senses, your spirit is awakened, and you see and experience the natural world for the beauty that it holds, or for the terrifying rage of the weather, or whatever you might get. You never know, right? And then after you have done this middle part of your journey, you end up 2-3 days before you go home, however long the journey is, and you start thinking, will I make my flight? Did I book the taxi or whatever transport it might be for the right time? And your brain starts buzzing up. It's ramping up speeds like a hard drive. You need to get back up to 7,200 RPMs again to really be ready to enter civilization. And when you start ramping up, you lose it. So it's the middle section of the journey that is truly, truly valuable. And it's also, I think, the section where, as a creator, as an artist, at least I personally create the best, because that's when I notice the stuff. That's when I see nature. That's when I feel nature. That's where the details matter,
When you pick up a camera and you start looking through the lens and you start making photographs, there's so many factors that are involved in depressing that shutter release button. One is just the obvious visual observation of a scene, the light, the color. And then the thing we're talking about right now is the feeling, right? And in one of your videos, you talk about story, and all of those things play a lesser or greater role, with each photograph that you create. Talk to me about sort of being in tune with the feeling, but also at the same time, having to think about creating a photograph that either tells a story or expresses in part that feeling that you had in discovering the scene and wanting to share it.
Oh, it's not an easy question, but I will do my best to try to answer that. First of all, technical aspects they don't matter. It doesn't matter which camera I'm shooting with or anything like that. As long as the focal length is right, everything else is largely unimportant. I think that's just a tool that you need to be so comfortable with that it becomes a part of yourself, an extension. You know it so well and so intimately that it disappears. So you're left with your sense of the reality and how that reality affects you as a human being. And I think that's really where the magic starts to truly happen. We as photographers, we can easily run around and snap, 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 snap. Mm-hmm. And some of that will be really good images, but do we really feel them? Like, I try to always bring one of these butt pads, these insulated foam things that I can sit on in a landscape, so that I can, if I have time, sometimes you have to work fast, sometimes sunset is happening now, or the wild animals is roaming in front of you and you have no time to even think, but if you have time, I like to sit down and really think and feel, because emotions have never been the easiest part in my life. At one point, I even suspected I might be autistic, but I did all the tests and I were not. But I always felt disconnected from emotions. So when I sit in these landscapes, I actually have to ask myself, what do I feel here? And once I do that, once I turn on the thinking brain and connects it to the feeling part of the body, all of a sudden there's a rush, an onslaught almost of impressions and emotions. And you start to see that you feel light, you feel peaceful, you feel happy. If it's animals in front of you, you might be asking, how are these animals feeling today? What are they doing today? I often even talk to animals when I do wildlife photography. I whisper to them as I go through my session with a particular animal, because it's a way that I connect with this animal, and it's nonsense talk. It's like, how are you doing in this day? What are you thinking about? How are you? Basic interactions, and then I thank them before I leave them if I have the opportunity. And somehow I feel like I get quite deep connections with wild animals when I do this, and I also feel that they are more peaceful and stay longer with me when I actually interact with them, which is weird, but that's the way it is. But this entire process means that I am 100% cognizant about what I feel about the subject. It also means that I give myself the time to really take in what the scene is about, what is happening in front of me, why is it important? And that gives me immediately the subject matter as well. I believe that we as photographers should be as intentional as we can. The more decisions we make, the less we can blame, I didn't get the shot because the camera did A, B, and C, or I didn't get the shots because this or this. If we make decisions about everything in that space, including what our subject matter is, and we do everything with intentionality, we can only blame ourselves for our failures, not opportunity, but ourselves and our decisions. And as I pick my subject matters, everything becomes very clear. And then I try to just really get the shot when it works. Sometimes we have to wait for, minutes. Sometimes we have to wait for days, especially in the Arctic, where we are so dependent on weather and wind to get the conditions that are favorable for whatever we're trying to shoot. But this whole process means that I, as a human being, have a very deliberate photograph on my memory card. When I then go to the final process of editing, I always try to edit it so the image looks the way I felt at the moment. If I felt light, I'm not going to go for a high contrast edit. I'm going to go for a very soft edit of that photograph, for example, because that's, in my view, might be a way that I want to express that peacefulness and happiness or whatever I felt. And so it's an entire process, an entire workflow, I guess, but all of that comes also very instinctively by now, I would say. I'm not sure if I'm just waffling on or if I'm actually answering the question.
Well, it's interesting because some of the images that you've made utilize a lot of negative space, which for a lot of photographers is very antithetical. It's the idea that you got to put a lot of stuff in the image in order to evoke a feeling, in order to tell a story. How did you come to find that using negative space was as effective a tool as anything else that you use?
I think it's about the peace and quiet. If you see the Arctic, and a lot of my subjects are not the Arctic, but let's discuss the Arctic again. The Arctic is a place where we want to depict what's in front of us, but we know that thing that is in front of us is dying, all right? We know that the glaciers are melting and disappearing. We know that in 50 to 100 years, we might not have any polar bears, we might not have any Arctic foxes up there, we might not have the wildlife we have today. The ecosystem that supports that life is slowly disappearing. That's a fact, right? And with that, there is a shadow in all these animals, in all the landscape. And how can we showcase this landscape in a timeless nature where we really can bring out the incredible beauty of the Arctic while still making it a little bit different as a reminder to the fact that we're looking at death and decay, but without necessarily showing death and decay, because I, as a person, don't believe in that type of storytelling. I don't want to show that directly because I believe beauty leads to love, and we protect that which we love. So, the more we can respect and love the Arctic or any part of the world that we care about, the more we feel for that, the more we want to protect it. And if we can portray the Arctic so that it's beauty, but somehow also have a reminder of that shadow. So the negative space that I'm using so much in my Arctic imagery is about showing the vastness, and it's an illusory permanence that exists. The Arctic looks like it's going to stay there forever. The glaciers are so vast, so big, they're going to be there forever. But the reality is that summer ice in the Arctic might be gone already in 6-7 years. It's a time span that is, we're not talking about 100 years, we're talking 6-7 years, and we might not have ice in the Arctic in the summertime. And that is going to transform things even faster, escalating the warming. And with that, I really want to showcase this vastness in a way that it becomes fragile. And I believe that the incredible amount of negative space that I sometimes chose or decide to work with can showcase these landscapes, first of all, as big, as immense, and we can look at the whole of an image and not just a detail. We can look at the vastness of it, but we can also, by minimizing it in the frame, look at the fragility of it. That's the thought process behind it, I would say. And if it works or not, I guess that's up to the beholder, but that's my intention, at least.
Those initial forays into that wilderness didn't naturally and immediately segue into a career as a photographer. You had a stint as a lawyer for a while, and then eventually, left that life and to eventually become a photographer. Tell me about that journey. What led you to become an attorney and later choose not to?
I think the truth of the matter was that, as many human beings, I was a little bit bullied in school, and I did not particularly enjoy that, and I don't think anyone really does. And it made me very self-conscious, and it made me seek out a path where I could always be right. And law stood out as something where you can always be right. It's about arguments. And I was very, very good at arguing about things. And I even got a bit of a reputation in law school as someone who did not want to have face-to-face in a legal discussion, because I typically either won or I would run them over until I won anyway. So I would win either way. And so I finished law school. I started working as a human rights lawyer for the United Nations, covering the African continent. Spent about 5-6 years working for the UN in Africa, helping African governments to write legal instruments. That was my job. So I was a lawmaker. Terribly interesting. I got to see countries that I never, ever would have visited otherwise. I traveled up to 250 days a year when I was with the UN, and I loved every moment. And I brought with me my camera on every single trip. If that was not a clue that I was doing the wrong thing, I don't know what was. Back in university, I was also the president of the photo club. I worked for Fujifilm. I did everything that I could in photography, and nothing really about my legal studies that I totally ignored. But that's a different story. I finished with the UN, and I started working in corporate finance, in corporate strategy, focusing on growth strategy for socially responsible businesses in Africa, because by now I'd become an expert on basically doing business in Africa from my work in the UN and in corporate strategy. And maybe fast forward 6-7 years later, I was out running and I lost my vision and had a massive headache and ended up in the hospital. And the doctors thought I was having a stroke, which I was not. And then they thought I was having an aneurysm, which I wasn't. And then it was an unruptured aneurysm. And then after that, a few weeks later, they thought I might have cancer. I did 4 MRIs in this period of my brain. There was nothing wrong with me. It was not until I, through Google, found out that maybe I had a damage to my occipital nerve that was controlling all the symptoms that I had. So they'd done 4 MRIs of my brain and nothing of my neck. It turned out I had a neck injury. And that was leading to nerve damage. But by now, I had just spent 3 months in and out of hospital. And I had realized that I was working 14 hours a day, wearing uncomfortable, expensive shoes. I was living in London at the time. And I hated my life. I truly hated everything that I did. I was working for good things and good projects, but it didn't give me what I wanted. It didn't give me... There was lots of fun and lots of excitement. I had one-on-one meetings with heads of state even in my job. It was exciting what I did. And cerebrally, it was the biggest challenge of my life. I loved every moment, but it wasn't giving me the creative outlet that I needed to function as a human being. So I closed down my business because by then I'd already started up my own shop, and I rented a little chalet, a little house in the French Alps. I went there for 6 months to recover, I thought. I wasn't really expecting that I would stay there, but in the end I did. I met Veronica, who's now my wife, in this period as well. And I started realizing that photography is so much fun because I started shooting as part of my recovery and trying to just walk a lot in the mountains. And I was like, somehow in the career path, I had lost that excitedness that I had. I still did my treks once a year in the Arctic or in the Alps or somewhere else fun in the world. I still did all that, but it was such a limited amount of time. And I was asking myself, how can I turn this around? How can I make my life about the things that I want to do? And that's where I started Terra Photography Expeditions, which is a workshop travel operator. And I said to myself, I'm going to run this business for 5 years until I can make a living as a photographer. And during those 5 years, I fell in love with teaching photography. I fell in love with the expeditions. I fell in love with the camaraderie that you share on expeditions, journeying across the world, discovering things with other photographers. And I also started realizing how much opportunities I had to actually give back to the world, and to the very nature that I loved so much through my photography and through advocating conservation. I started working with biologists in the Choco rainforest, started doing projects, started building projects to take climate scientists to the Arctic, and I started just building out this pretty big pro bono portfolio that basically I could channel my proceeds from running workshops into actually doing something good. And that is kind of how I ended up where I am today. Long story, but
that's
lots
amazing.
of turns.
This episode is made possible by the support of altadinaphotographers.org, a nonprofit organization committed to helping photographers who've been affected by the recent fires here in Southern California. Whether it's a lost archive or the equipment essential to their practice, many photographers are struggling to rebuild. Through this registry, Altadena Photographers connects those in need with donors, individuals, and companies who want to make a difference. To find out how you can contribute gear, funds, or time, visit altadinaphotographers.org. Every bit of support matters. You're probably one of the first people who I've heard who's self-diagnosed using Google and got it right.
that we're talking 300 hours or something of Googling. So it was not a 5-minute job.
No, I bet. But, I was just talking to somebody who just started teaching himself, and he said one of the things he had to get over was this feeling of feeling like a fraud.
Oh, you never get over that.
Yeah. But, it's there. It's there. And it's interesting with that. That's sort of the inn that you came in. Talk to me about, we often on the show talk about finding one's voice as a photographer. But it's another thing to find one's voice as a teacher, as an educator, as a facilitator. Talk to me about that.
I think you can't separate that from finding your own voice as a photographer or as an artist, because they need to be joined up. I didn't perhaps know that in the beginning when I set up Terra. I had been a photographer in one way or another since I was 13 years old. My father gave me my first camera. And being a bit nerdy, and I am happy to admit that I can be a bit nerdy about photography, I knew everything there was to know about photography. And that sounds a bit like a big statement. But technically, about cameras, I probably knew everything at least that I needed to know. Artistically, I didn't know anything. But technically, I knew how to operate a camera, and I could run circles around basically anyone I knew when it comes to technical aspects of photography. So I was pretty cocky, I was like, I can teach this. It's not a problem. I know everything there is to know about a camera. Of course, I didn't, but it felt like I did at the time because, it's just how we build ourselves up sometimes. And I started running workshops, and I kind of hit the ground quite fast, realizing that I didn't know anywhere near what I needed to know to teach photography. It was like eating humble pie, It's like literally I had guests in front of the whole workshop groups telling me I'm wrong, and it's like, it hurts. It really hurts. And I realized that actually I don't know enough. I might have been a photographer my entire life, and what I knew was adequate for the photography I was doing. But to teach photography, you need to level up. And I put myself on a course of consuming everything to basically do that. So over the first couple of years of still running successful workshops, because clients were happy and they still come back till this day, but it was really a matter of leveling up the skills and finding a way to teach it, because teaching is not easy. I've worked with a lot of talented professional photographers that have come in as auxiliary teachers or inspirations on my workshop over the years. And there are many of them I would never work with again because they're not good teachers. They're too selfish, or they're too blunt, or they can't explain things. They can do their own photography and their own work, and they are fantastic photographers, but they can't teach it. And I was kind of starting to compare myself with these individuals, and I realized I need to basically dial everything back to basic and understand the need from my guests coming on these workshops. Why are they there? Are they really there for the photography? Are they there to actually experience the camaraderie, the moment, and get some nice shots along the way? And I started realizing that my voice as a teacher had to be 50% as a friend and 50% as an authority within the photography. So I learned everything I needed to know. I scoured every book I could find, and it just leveled up that. So that gave me the confidence that now I know the facts. I started experimenting with doing some talks and things like this on various aspects on photography. In the beginning, it probably wasn't very good, but as you mature, as you see what people take in, you start changing, you adapt, you see what works, what doesn't work, and you level up. But I've come to realize that over the years that the most important thing that I can do as a workshop leader is to just be there as a technical, creative, and as a friend, to travel. And that's kind of, I think, why I love what I do so much in the photography expedition space, because I travel with fantastic human beings. And they all have these amazing stories. And when you're sitting in an icebreaker or ice class ship in the Arctic waters, or you're in a boat in Galapagos, or in a canoe down the Amazon River somewhere, you become very intimate with your guests. You talk to them, you listen to them. Why are you here? Where are you? Who are you at home? What's your background? That conversation is more important often than the photography, because we're all humans and we all seek that connection.
And I like how you speak about, that part of your goal is to create a relationship with those photographers, with the environment where you guys are photographing. That you want them to be invested in it, because when they go back home, they can be a real advocate, because they've built a relationship with that place so beyond simply making pretty photographs.
Yeah, pretty photographs are fantastic. And I actually respect some really cool photographers that actually say themselves that the only thing they do is take pretty photographs. And I have a ton of respect for that. So what I'm about to say is not something to demean the desire to create pretty photographs. But for me, I've always sought a higher meaning, a higher goal than just to take pretty photographs. I've always wanted to achieve something with it, because as I said before, if we can make people love something, they will protect it. If we can make people feel connected through our artworks, through our images to nature, they might want to protect it, right? And by sharing these experiences in extreme places, we are part of the problem. If I rent an ice-classed expedition ship and I take 12 photographers around Svalbard searching polar bears, Arctic foxes, and walruses, and lots of other exciting animals, we are contributing to the problem, unless we can have some kind of positive impact. And for me personally, for every journey I go to the Arctic, I want to be able to talk to 100 people and tell them how beautiful it is up there, how amazing it is, how precious it is, how important it is, not just for our ecosystem, but for the sense of beauty up there, that we preserve this environment and we try to halt the climate crisis and the global warming that is happening. So for me, the messages of conservation and trying to share that with the group that I'm with, I think is incredibly important, because that's kind of how I justify doing what I'm doing. Because as an environmentally conscious individual that believes in sustainability, otherwise what I'm doing would be pretty bad. not pretty bad, and maybe I'm overstating that, but we definitely would be a part of the problem rather than the solution. And I'd rather be on the solution side of things.
What led you to Ecuador?
My wife was born in Ecuador, and we now spend our time between Gothenburg in Sweden and Quito in Ecuador. And I suffered a burnout in 2022 from one of my charity projects, one of my pro bono stuff that just took everything from me. And that was a 28-day ski expedition across the Arctic. And as I was recovering from that burnout, I just told my wife, I need a big change. I need a big change. Why don't we go live in Ecuador for 3 years? And she's obviously her home country. She said, yeah, absolutely, let's do it. The day after we arrived in Ecuador, we found out she's pregnant. And so our son was born here, and he's now soon 1.5 years old. He's 16 months now. And we have a little family here, and yeah, we split our time between Sweden and here, and it's Ecuador. It's a hidden gem for photography, for just being a human being. It's not without problems. It has political challenges like any country, but it's a country where I can drive 4 hours and end up in the Amazon. I can drive 5 hours in the other direction, and I'm on the Pacific Ocean coast with the coastal rainforest. Or I can drive 1 hour from my house and I have glaciers on top of volcanoes. Or I take a 2-hour flight and I'm in the Galapagos. It's a pretty intense place, and as a nature photographer, it's breathtaking. There's nothing else to say about it.
Talk to me about the experience of going from photographing one distinctive natural landscape into another one, right?
I still go back to the Arctic now, though.
Oh, yeah. But in terms of
take me out.
The mindset, in terms of how you see something, right? Because if you're entrenched in terms of photographing a particular place in a certain way, or even a subject matter in a certain way, throw a photographer into completely different circumstances, yes, they have a certain skill set,
different.
But yeah. So talk to me about sort of discovering how to see in Ecuador as compared to what you were doing before.
Let me quickly tell you about the simplicity of Arctic landscapes. It's all snow, ice, water, sky. There's nothing else. There's a few rugged mountain peaks. You're in minimalist heaven. If you find wildlife, they are isolated just by being themselves in their natural environment, especially in winter, and it's so easy to photograph. It's so hard to be there physically. It's so hard to find the animals to begin with, but once you have them, it's easy. Okay, let's transport ourselves for the wildlife area down to Ecuador and put yourself in Galapagos, where you have iguanas literally crawling over your sneakers, or in the Amazon, where you have bugs and some snakes here and there, and a million monkeys crawling around the trees, and there's wildlife absolutely everywhere, but you can't see it because there's leaves everywhere. It's like you're literally eating humble pie as you're trying to understand how to even get them in frame. You see a polar bear at 100 meters distance, the hand-eye correlation when you bring up that 400 milli lens or whatever it is to the eye, you nail it every time. You try doing the same thing with a tiny bird in the rainforest or a monkey running across the canopy. I realized that I needed to level up everything when I came here. First of all, the knowledge. The more you know about an animal, the easier it is to shoot it. If you know where it sleeps, what it eats, and where he or she finds the food. If you know what time of year they mate, what time of year they display a particular behavior that you seek, the more you know about the animal, the easier it is to predict how that animal is going to react. And also your experience with that animal. The first time I went to photograph brown-headed spider monkeys, for example, I didn't have a clue how they were moving in the trees. Now, if I see them, I have an ability to predict what they will be doing because I have built some kind of understanding with them. And when it comes to the landscapes instead, again, the Arctic is perhaps one of the hardest places to shoot because of the minimalism, but that also makes it easy because it's easy to select a subject matter and you need to be coasting out very small details in very big scenes often to make it work. If you're shooting at the Amazon, which for landscape photography, I would say is the hardest place on planet Earth to shoot because it's just chaos. Yeah. It's just leaves and trees and stuff hanging around and there's no light. If there is light, it's coming through the canopy of the trees and that would just be burnt out in your images because you need to expose for the extreme shadows you have under the really dense canopy of trees. You need to rethink everything. You need to start looking for smaller scenes. You need to learn to be a truly diverse photographer, because it's the skills you have in the Arctic in those kind of scenarios when it comes to landscape, they're not transferable at all to the rainforest, or even to Galapagos for that matter, or anything down here, because it's so vastly different. And that makes it fun. That makes it a challenge. That makes it, worthwhile doing it, because you're just out exploring something new, learning something new,
Yeah. So much of that photography, whether you're shooting in the Arctic or whether you're shooting in Galapagos or in Ecuador, has nothing to do with the equipment itself. It's getting to the destination. It's getting to the place where you can make the images. And
100%.
There's a reason why not a lot of people do this kind of photography, because a lot of people who, like, hey, let me park my car here, walk 50 yards to where it says X, put your camera here and take a picture, right? And they have a wonderful landscape picture, right? But the kind of photography we're talking about is much more sort of demanding of the constitution and patience. Talk to me about sort of learning about what works best for you in terms of how you prepare yourself, because the images that you make are a result of all the choices that you make even before you raise the camera up to your eye.
Of course, I think the hardest part in all of this is making sure that you're actually there to begin with, as you say. Let me say this. If I have a super skill, any super skill, it's that I am extremely good at suffering slowly. I have skied for a month without showering or stopping, or obviously I slept in a tent every night, but I've done those kind of things. I've trekked for a month without stopping, more than to sleep at night or pick up some food if I pass something. I have this ability to ignore aches and pains and to push through those things to get to these places. I don't mind long travel. I don't mind physical discomfort. I don't mind a lot of these things, and that opens up a whole new world to me. And I'm also not afraid of the unknown. I actually thrive on the unknown, and that circles us back to that 19-year-old boy who did his first expedition or trek in the Swedish mountain and realized that actually he's proud of himself. This builds self-esteem and all that stuff. And it's the same thing now. I thrive on that exploration. I love finding out what's around the next corner. And sometimes the next corner is another day away of trekking or whatever it is. And that is important if you want to head into the rainforest or you want to head into the Arctic. And you need to be looking. You need to be curious. You need to be going for the unknown. You need to be excited about that unknown. You need to really, really want to learn something about yourself and the photography. So as you say, it's not about the gear that you bring. Yeah, sure, it can be important sometimes, but it's really about how you as a human being are prepared and able to deal with it. A lot of people fear the rainforest, as an example. And we've seen Indiana Jones. We know how many spiders there are in the rainforest. This is all BS. It's Hollywood. What Steven Spielberg did to the poor sharks, Hollywood is doing to the rainforest. There are some biting insects, yes, but it's worse in the Arctic. In Sweden in summer, oh my God, the mosquitoes are killing you. You get maybe a 5% of that in the rainforest. It's not bad. Yes, there are some snakes and stuff, but as soon as you come walking, they slither away. They don't want to be anywhere near you. There are things that can happen to you in the rainforest. You're far from civilization. You're far from hospitals. You're far from medical aid and assistance and all these things. But generally speaking, it's a fairly safe place, especially if you're staying as a tourist in a lodge or whatever, where you have, you can be dry and clean and fed every night with healthy water. Everything is peachy. It's easy comparatively. So as a human being, you just need to. I'm not anything extreme. I'm good at suffering, but I'm average fit, average health, average everything, I would say. And these things are you just have to put yourself out there. The mindset is everything when it comes to this stuff. You just have to be inquisitive. You just have to really be curious about what's around the corner.
When it comes to your kit, not your camera equipment, right? What would you say are the 3 things that are absolutely essential that you would recommend for any photographer who wants to do this that they should and have to have?
The butt pad, the insulator, because feeling is so much more than we think it is. Understanding your scene is so important. The coffee thermos, because I like to have a coffee as I sit and watch these landscapes. And let's bring a first aid kit as well, because you never know what's going to happen, right? But it's not complicated things. Like I truly believe that, we live in a society today where we're far removed from the wilderness, from the wild spaces. Mm-hmm. And that real physical remoteness, or if it's an emotional remoteness, a psychological type of remoteness, we believe that the wilderness is dangerous. We believe that all types of harms is going to befall us if we move into the wilderness. That's the reason I believe we're not protecting the wilderness more than we actually are. So the more people that can realize that nature is super safe. There are no robbers out hiding in nature. Come on. Why would they want to be there? They're just as scared of nature as everyone else is. Mm-hmm. It's a really safe place to be. Sleeping alone in a tent where you hear weird sounds at night is probably just a deer or whatever, depending on where you are in the world. It's literally bring a butt pad, a coffee thermos, and a first aid kit. Take a walk in your forest, explore it, maybe learn a little bit of navigation or whatever. But if we can bridge the closeness to nature, that's the greatest gift we can give ourselves and the planet.
How would you say your relationship to the places that you visit, that you photograph, have changed as a result of getting older, becoming a father? Yeah. How do you feel that's sort of shaped the way
one
you
is
see?
Easy. The father one is easy. All of a sudden, I've started dreaming about revisiting some of the best places I've ever been, and I want to revisit them in 7, 8, 9 years with my son. That's really one of my biggest goals in life right now, to be healthy and to have a youthful life so that when he is old enough to get into the world, I can be there with him and do it together, because that would probably be the greatest gifts of my life, to do that. Mm-hmm. But my relationship to nature in general and getting older and all that, I think I'm more, I don't want to use the word aggressive, but I'm more pushy with the conservation stuff now than I was 10 years ago. Like the project Arctic Transcendence that we spoke about over email, it didn't start as a project. It started as me going to a place that I just fell in love with, and then started documenting that and continuously documented that for first a decade and then 2 decades. And now it's been 26 years of documenting the Arctic. But it was only maybe 7, 8 years ago that took the form of a project. It was just images. But all of a sudden, I at some point realized that I have an incredible database of images now, of art that I've created in this region, and it doesn't mean anything. But it could mean something, because as I am now a little bit older, I'm not sure how much me being a father has to do with it, because this happened before them, but as I'm maturing in my thinking, I'm seeing what's happening to the world, and many of the places that I visited, I can, by my own images and my own eyes, see the difference in glaciers and things like this. I can feel that it's happening, and I'm sad that it's happening, because these natural places are the places that have given me so much as a human being, and I want to give back more. And I think as I grow older, I want to give back more and more and more. And I'm pushing much more towards that direction, putting the conservation spin on the artworks that I have done, because I think the conservation spin has always been there, but it has been there unintentionally, if you want. Now I'm much more intentional in the way I create, and in that I'm more intentional in the way I experience those landscapes. Because if I go now to the Arctic, I can't unsee the changes. I can't unlearn the death and decay, to use really harsh words about it. But I can't also unsee the beauty or unlearn my appreciation for it. So it becomes this incredible fire within to tell these stories, to try to make an impact, to try to have meaning, and try to really make people listen. And I think, through my conservation images, if I can achieve 2 things, I'm changing the topic here unintentionally, but the first one would be, if I just want people to see my images and say, oh my God, nature is beautiful. Because I think that art can really get our hearts pumping and moving. and it can get us looking in a trajectory of a sustainable future. And then they can go to the scientists and they can go and find the facts, and I think art can move us forward in a direction that science doesn't. I think art is kind of like, it points the big arrow, go in that direction, because it plays the heartstrings. But art doesn't tell the facts that we need to know about what's happening to our world. The scientists can deal with that. I'm not a scientist. I would never claim to be. And this whole thing is how I see nature now. I can't unsee the connections. I can't remove myself from this. It's become, I almost wish I could just enjoy it in its innocence, or in this kind of simplicity where I didn't have to think about all these things. But I can't stop thinking about these things because they're so important. Yeah. And I keep creating in that direction. Long answer, hard answer.
It's a good answer. Well, my last question that I ask each guest is I ask them to recommend another photographer for our listeners to discover and explore. And it can be anyone, someone you've long admired or someone you've recently discovered. So who would that one photographer be and why?
One of my absolute favorite photographers is Nick Brandt. Do you know his work?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes, I do.
Particularly his older series, the Inherit the Dust, and the Across a Ravaged Land or something like that. These older series he created a decade or two ago, whatever it was, where he's just depicting African wild animals set in kind of like minimalist, humanized settings in one of the series, and in the other one, he has printed these incredible life-size prints and put them in the landscape that used to be theirs. And to give an example, there's one that is so powerful. It's a picture of an elephant, I believe, and it's printed life-size. It's enormous, this print, and they have put it in a city under an overpass. There is children sniffing glue in the foreground under this picture of the elephant, and it's the most heartbreaking, terrible, but clever image that it hits you in the heart. You can't. It hits you cerebrally. It hits you emotionally. It's that kind of image that it stops you dead in your track, and you go, "Holy crap, that is intense." Yeah. And you realize that where that overpass, that road, and those children are now sniffing glue, maybe 30 years ago, that was the land of the elephant, and that's powerful. Yeah. So that will be my recommendation. I think his work is phenomenal.
Well, Jonas, thank you so much. It was really a pleasure to have a chance to talk with you.
Thank you so much for being here, and I look forward to hearing this as it comes out.
Thanks to Jonas for sharing his voice and vision. You can explore more of his work by visiting jonaspaurell.com or following him on Instagram. You can also support The Candid Frame directly through Patreon or with a one-time donation via buymeacoffee.com/The Candid Frame. Your support helps to make these conversations happen. And you'll find links for both on our website or in the show notes. And a big thank you to our supporters, including Rusty Simmons, Greg Miller, Mike Branch, Susan Rosenberg-Jones, Joe and Velda, Linda Cruz, and so many more whose generosity really makes all this work possible. We've also revived our newsletter on Substack. It's where I share thoughts on photography, creativity, and what I'm learning behind the scenes. Subscribe now and be part of the community. And remember, if you ever have trouble finding a specific episode of the show, download the Candid Frame app, available for both iOS and Android, and it's free with no additional purchases required. And thanks for your support, because you made that happen. Our audio engineer is Martin Taylor, who you can find at theothermartintaylor.com. The show's senior producer is Cynthia Parker. And this is Ibarian X, and this is The Candid Frame.